ready for that rendition of Sketchbook? Welcome, everyone, to the Hugs Not Drugs podcast. I'm John Barleycorn. I'm here with Dr. Uggs. Say something, Dr. Uggs. Something. And say something, Hugs Not Drugs. You know, I have the same voice as you, John Barleycorn, but I am more of a spiritual entity most of the time. You are a brother, and I appreciate that. But we all also have part 4 of John G today. I'm very excited about this. This man is incredible, and he's been very generous with his time. And I thank you, John. Welcome to the show. Any opening remarks?
Yes, well, it's an honor to be here today, and this is fun. You know, the work I get to do is when I work with other men and take them through the steps, and we share our experience, strength, and hope. But this really is truly for fun, and the great blessing with this is that I get to share my experience, strength, and hope with someone that has a lot of experience in this, and we get to share our experience and tell a few jokes and look at the great reality of what we've been given through 12-step recovery.
Yeah, this is like a little song, a little dance, a little seltzer down my pants, or down Dr. Hugs Not Drugs pants. Anyway, that's really funny. Let's see him be spiritual about that. You know what I mean? All right. I'm going to do the commercial, get that out of the way, and then give you the floor, John G. Wait a minute. Aren't I supposed to be doing the host? Aren't I the number one host here? Yeah, I forgot about that. All right, here's the commercial. This is brought to you by John Forlenza-Bailey, a real prince of a guy. He wrote 2 books. He sponsors this. He bankrolls this thing. He doesn't pay us much, I'll tell you that. But he bankrolls this thing. The Transformation of Dr. Uggs is a book he wrote last year. And that book is an original fairy tale that explains the progression of the disease of chemical dependency. It's not intended to be a story about blaming others for the acquisition of an illness. This fairy tale is intended to explain, not to blame. It is a story of discovery, insight, acceptance, and finally, the right choices to live drug-free if one is chemically dependent. Then the first book he wrote, and he did this in his private practice for years, and he had good results with it. Working people through the Road to Wellness workbook. That workbook is designed to provide education, emotional support, and inspiration to persons suffering from addiction. It offers step-by-step lessons to people striving to turn their lives around regarding abstinence, relapse prevention, family dynamics, and self-assessment to continue to discover self day by day. Recovery's up to you. Mentors help, journals help. You must exchange and surrender destructive behaviors for constructive ways of handling the day-to-day stressors or triggers of life. No one deserves to continue to suffer from active addiction. Get better, do the work. All right, the commercial's over. We got that over with. Okay, back to you, Barleycorn. Thank you, Dr. Uggs. That's why we have you around here, to do the freaking commercial. You're too good to me. You know what I mean? One day you're going to start drinking again, and I'm going to switch all this podcast over to the Dr. Uggs podcast. Everybody, light up. All right. That's enough of that. Not today, brother. Not today. Okay, so John G., thanks for putting up with that for the last 4 minutes.
Awesome. Well, you know, it's great to be here, and that was entertaining. And not only is it great to be here, it's great to be anywhere. Life's good today, and I was just suddenly I was back at Smithers Rehab, and I was standing up at my first meeting in the rehab, and my counselor told me, Miss Renee Z, who some people up in that part of the world may know who she is, an amazing lady, and she told me, she says, John, stand up and identify yourself as an addict or an alcoholic and say, you know, my name is John, I'm an alcoholic and I'm an addict, and I need to stop blaming people, places, and things and take responsibility for my own recovery. You know, because one of the things that we want to deny is that we actually have this disease. And, you know, it makes me think that my denial Denial, don't even notice I am lying, will tell me that I really don't want to have a disease based on alcoholism or addiction because of the social stigma. I remember growing up, this whole thing about oh, an alcoholic, like that was something that wasn't spoken about in my family, yet everyone in my family pretty much was one. So I started to look at this, and I came to the realization that I had a lot of other problems when I first came into recovery. And what I found out was that if I took care of my alcoholism, which was my primary problem, all this other stuff like depression, the PTSD, which obviously I'm still, to this day, we continue to deal with these things. But at least I know that if I take care of my alcoholism first, because every morning I wake up with untreated alcoholism, I hit my knees, I say the third step and the seventh step prayers, and I ask for the guidance and the willingness to follow what I think the next right thing is based on what God and the universe is putting in front of me, and to allow myself. And I have a spiritual practice. I do this every day at 3 p.m. I forgive everyone who has ever offended me or hurt me
Wow.
for everything. And if I can't do that, and if I have difficulty, and the reason I do it at 3 is it has to do with my religious tradition. I
Yeah.
had an uncle that he grew up Catholic. Of course, I went to 12 years of Catholic school, and of course, that was downhill after I got paddled the first day in the first grade. That was my educational experience. But no, there was a lot of wonderful people as well. And but my uncle Bill, who stopped drinking many years ago, he would say to me, kid, 3 o'clock is the hour of mercy.
I know.
And I would say, yes, traditionally that's when they say the carpenter hanging on the cross, gave up the ghost and said, "Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do."
Yes.
And if I could have that image in my mind, and not to be, trying to promote one, faith tradition above another, but if I could think of just a man, up on a cross saying, "Forgive them, for they know not what they do." That willingness to forgive and all of that. How can I look at that guy and complain about, the problems that I'm having because someone's offended my ego?
Yeah. Barleycorn here. JC was a good role model, uh, son of God. Uh, Even if you don't believe that, he was a good role model. But I come from a long line of cowards. I am going to exercise that role model, but uh, his lifespan didn't last too long. I mean, and you have been sober
Longer than he
longer
lived.
than JC lived. But one of the things that you're saying is we learn through ritual space. Uh, Correct me if I'm wrong. We learn through ritual space. You having this ritual, you having this belief is so powerful that it works so well that you just keep on doing it because you don't want to stop doing what works.
Yes, we talk about doing this one day at a time and the spiritual practices that we have every day. And, we found again and again that there's certain qualities. It makes me think of a book I once read called The Natural History of Alcoholism by Dr. George M. Valiant, a Harvard educated psychiatrist. And he did a 20 plus year study with the Harvard School of Alcoholism Studies. And they found that they identified four things that alcoholics that were in recovery for more than 10 years, that had more than 10 years sobriety, or addicts that had more than 10 years of recovery, that they had in common. Four things that were in common was the first one was that they had a vital spiritual experience. Okay. And the second um, thing was that they substituted their negative addictive alcoholic behavior for some kind of positive life enhancing behavior. Thirdly, they were involved in an activity that reminded them of what their life was like before they came into recovery. So they had the reminders of their addictive and alcoholic behavior. And lastly, they were involved in an activity that gave them a renewed sense of hope. And I thought it was almost comical that this 20 plus years study taught us what we intuitively knew in Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous and the other 12 step fellowships. And
Yeah,
Yeah.
this reminds me of the movie Awakenings. I do a lot of movie therapy, and I talk about scripts about this, where Robin Williams is being interviewed to do something because he has a PhD, and he said, well, "What's your PhD in?" He said, I I examined 10,000 earthworms about how they can't do such and such," and the guy looked at him and says, "Earthworms can't do such and such," and he says, "Yeah, I know, I proved it." But Valiant is a remarkable man. I studied him too. It's what a contribution he did to
Yes.
recovery.
Yes, and I didn't mean to minimize his work in any way. He was just it's just the insight that he had, and doing this was really insightful to read that book. And as well, I stopped working on my PhD, which was in pretty heavy drinking. So I'm grateful for that today.
Hey, these two guys, Barleycorn and Hugs Not Drugs, they got a PhD too. Poor hopeless drunks.
Drugs.
Ah!
Uh, that's right. Talk about hopelessness. I knew what it was to be hopeless when I first came in, and I could relate. The experience that I went through the first three steps. And if we look at the spiritual principles of the first three steps, they talk in the book about, honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness, but the actual spiritual principle of the first step being honesty. And I think about how I came in and I got honest. I made the admission, that I was an alcoholic, that my life was unmanageable, I was powerless and unmanageable. And then once I made that honest admission, which was a lengthy process, I already talked about that in our last podcast. How I ended up writing this, this literal novel about my powerlessness, unmanageability, and then only through that, then I started to see what was going on around me. And in that second step, I came to believe, we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity because I saw what was going on around me. And it was the first time in my life, in spite of my dad putting me on my knees as a child and me seeing the reflection of God in his eyes and going through 12 years of Catholic school where those people had dedicated their lives to try to bring awareness and a God consciousness to little kids like me. It wasn't until I came into Alcoholics Anonymous and I saw the tangible evidence of the miracles of what God can do in people's lives. And when I say God, I mean just simply a higher power. And I've come to learn that if I put limitations on God, I put limitations on myself. It's like the French philosopher Blaise Pascal once said. We God created us in His image, and unfortunately, we returned the favor. We made Him just as rude and obnoxious and uncaring and unforgiving and and materialistic and hateful as we are. And that's where, when we come to believe, the true believers in Alcoholics Anonymous, they understand the depth and intensity of God's love, and they likewise, the true believers in this program, understand how our defects of character, our pride, which leads the procession of the seven deadly sins, the greed, the lust, the anger, the gluttony, the envy, the sloth, and how all of this stuff is born out of fear, and FEAR, false evidence appearing real, or I can F everything and run, forget everything and run, or I can face everything and recover.
That is the dominant. That is the dominant feeling that we have, that we're not in touch with when we come in, and we have this tremendous blind spot that's uncovered in treatment. You went through your fear. You went through your fear with faith. We talked about that before. That fear knocked on the door, faith answered, fear
Yes.
was gone. So you had the faith, and that's way that's the surrender to win in the second step. And you went through 1, 2, and 3 in treatment, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
Yeah, and that's what I try to do in well, when I was a counselor, just get them to 1, 2, and 3. If they do 1, 2, and 3, the rest is the journey later. And in the Road to Wellness book with John Forlenza-Bailey,
he was getting people in touch with 1, 2, and 3 in 30 days of that. Oh, he put in the commercial. He snuck that in. Oh, okay.
Yeah, so today I got this thing, which is faith. And one of my buddies in Georgia used to say, John, I got faith. And faith is hope with a track record.
Mm-hmm.
So I did come to believe. And dealing with fears, I remember early on, I was, after I had gotten injured and in the fire department, and I was on light duty for a couple of years. They didn't know what they were going to do with me. And they sent me a letter saying, we're going to retire you on less money because you're an alcoholic and you have, various issues which are in the nature of an ordinary disability. Meanwhile, they actually had a film crew with literally my ass on fire, coming out of a building. I had smoke coming out of my coat and
Right.
had herniated disc and all these injuries. So when I got this letter, I called my sponsor, George, up, and George was just this wonderful man and, a machinist from London, England. And he was, matter of fact, he was the age I am now when I met him. And he had 26 years when he was 66. And his grand sponsor was Bill Wilson. And so I called George up and he says, John, he says, you sound pretty angry. I said, yeah. He says, well, why? I want you to do this. He says, read the third step twice and call me back in an hour. And I got the 12 and 12 out and I did that. I read the third step twice. I called him back and he says, how you feeling now, kid? I said, well, a little bit better. He says, you still angry? So I said, yeah, of course I am. So then he asked me the $64,000 question. He says, John, I understand you're angry, but what are you afraid of?
There it is.
And I thought about this and I said, the nerve of this man, you know who I am. I work in the busiest firehouse in the city. And you're asking me, what am I afraid of? Like,
and you got caught in the backdraft. I mean, you had lots of things to be dealing with. You had lots of things to be dealing with. Of course, you were afraid.
sure. So then he says, at that point, what are you afraid of? And I explained to him what was going on with, the FD trying to put me out on less money. And instead of giving me, an accidental disability pension. And he posed the question in this way. He says, no, John, what are you afraid of? He says, get honest about
God,
this.
you had some good people in your life.
And I said, George, I said, I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to take care of my family.
Yeah.
I got 3 kids. I got another daughter from my first marriage that I'm supporting. And I just don't see any way that I'm going to be able to do this on what they're offering me right now. And then this is what he told me. He says, well, young man, he says, we've been through this process. Where is your faith?
Right.
And then I thought, well, where are you going with this, George? And he says, John, and this was the real question. He asked me, what was I afraid of? But then he says to me, John, has God not provided you with everything that you've needed up to this point? Not everything you wanted, but has he not provided you with everything you needed? And I said, yes, sir, he has. He says, so where's your faith? Why do you think it would be different today or different any day going forward? And that's where the concept of today I have faith, which is hope with a track record. I know that God provides. That's one of my mantras. When in doubt, God provides. Always did, always will. And that's where my faith comes in, which is the hope with the track record. I've seen the fruition of the things that I hoped would come to be, and it's greater than anything I could ever have imagined.
Well, I'm looking. Bob Dylan just walked into the room. He's saying, your debutante knows what you need, but I know what you want. Oh, mama, is this really the end? To be stuck inside a mobile with the Memphis Blues again. Escort him out, Dr. Uggs.
Hey, these times are a changing. Get his ass out of here.
Maybe another episode or something. But let's talk about needs and wants and why wants can get us in a whole lot of troubles, and needs are, when we get our needs met through a relationship with a higher power, everything goes God's way, not ours.
Yeah, and I think one of the revelations I had with that was I had a couple that I had met actually in CA, Cocaine Anonymous, and married couple, and the gentleman was a lawyer and his wife was a therapist, and I was getting ready to leave the New York area to move down to Georgia at that time. This was in 1993, and I had just celebrated 4 years, and I was getting ready to leave. And they handed me a card, and when I opened it, it said, "You know, the easy part of doing God's will is when we allow it to become our own." And I just read that, and it really was a bit of an awakening, an epiphany for me, because I realized, you know what, if I just let go, and it reminds me of I've heard many talks by the great late Sandy Beach,
Mm-hmm.
and Sandy used to say, spiritual growth is not about getting anything. It's about the willingness to let go of everything. And today I know that the only things that truly stand between me and my serenity and my peace is my unwillingness, to let go of something. So if I'm willing to let go of anything that's standing in the way of my peace, then I can have that serenity in my life. And it goes back to when George asked me that question, what am I afraid of? Then he sends me to this Catholic priest, which, after my history of abuse, was something that I was really not a little bit apprehensive about. But he looked at me, says, "John, I'm going to send you to a man to do your fifth step with."
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "Well, George, why don't we do it?" And he just looked at me and smiled. And here I am. I'm 29 years old and he's 66.
Mm-hmm.
And he just looked me in the eye and he says, "John, there's some things about you that I probably don't want to know." And I thought about it, the humility of this man, looking back now and thinking the humility of this man, who certainly could have handled a fifth step with me, telling me to go to someone else that he thought was better suited for it. I just thought that was wonderful, because my guy, George, he sponsored well over 300 people by the time I had met him.
Mm-hmm.
And so I go to see this priest and we start talking, and he asked me a few questions. And one of them was, "John, you're only as sick as your deepest secret."
Mm-hmm.
And I told him about what had happened to me, and of course he told me that it wasn't my fault. But as we went through this process and we did it, the traditional way of looking at the seven deadly sins. Of course, pride leading the procession, because that allows us to commit the next six. And as we went through these things, and then he says, "John, whatever it is that you've done," he says, "if it has a name, then someone's done it before you, and you're not unique." I said, I'm not unique in my shame." He says, "No." And I said, "Oh," and then I thought about it and I started to look at this and we went through the list. And as we went through the list, I started to see the reality of this. And he says to me, "John, these defects of character are actually born out of righteous, God given desires." And I thought this was, well, where are you going with this? He says, "Well, let's look at pride for a second." He goes, "That false pride and the ego edging God out, and that separates us from God, ourselves, and other people. The pride that tells us we want to step on someone who's down so we could look a little taller."
Yes, sir.
And he says, "But if you look at the opposite of that and you take the fear aspect out of it, what we're really searching for is that relationship with our higher power, the relationship with our true selves, and the relationship that we can have with each other. That is the real God given desire that we have in pride." Let's look at greed. When we're chasing money to the point that it's affecting our relationship with God, self, and others in a negative way, and it's severing those relationships, not allowing them to grow to be what they could be, then yes, then greed but greed is actually born out of a natural, righteous desire to have financial security,
Right.
to be able to provide for our material needs, because we are in a material world. You know. And
And
then he went on to talk about, right, so we went through pride, greed, lust. I could certainly tell you, anytime I compromised myself so I could have sex with somebody and not showing them the respect and being responsible, that always came back to bite me. That was a painful reality. Here I was, instead of trying to find the right woman when I was in active addiction, I could walk into a room and in a nanosecond I could detect the pheromones of the one woman in the room out of 300 people that would cause me the most pleasure and pain simultaneously. The hottest, sickest woman in the room that would put up with me, and we would be drawn to each other like moths to the flame.
See, barleycorn doesn't have that. This barleycorn doesn't have that, because I come from a long line of cowards, and I know I can't even look at the beautiful girls and come up to them because I don't have any emotional maturity. I can attribute that, so he doesn't have to worry about it. But he does have a prayer. Say the prayer. Say the prayer.
Say the prayer.
Okay, here's the prayer. Hugs Not Drugs, why don't you say the prayer? Same voice as you. I'll say it with some sincerity, though. Dear God, whatever I've done wrong right now, please don't strike me blind now.
That's about as spiritual as you can get, man. All right.
Well, getting back to my thing, I mean, I would chase a broom if it were wearing a skirt, and to think, and I would normally, I would go out at night, and I used to put a $10 bill. This is when we still plugged phones in the wall, and had my little push button phone, and didn't even have a voicemail on the thing yet, and just after the rotary dial ages, which if you're old enough, you might remember when we actually used a rotary dial. So here I was. I would have my phone on my speaker in my little studio apartment after I got divorced, and I had a little card there. It said "Ring a Ride Car Service," and I'd put a $10 bill there. And when I would wake up next to this woman that I would pick up at the local saloon, and wake up with the realization that this was a woman who I would normally not want to be caught eating pizza with, you know. And then I would make believe I was sick, and I would say, "Oh, honey, I don't feel good," and she'd get up and go to the bathroom, and I'd say, "Yeah, I said I left a 10 on the speaker and just called Dial a Ride. They come, Ring a Ride. They come the fastest," and she would be out of there. But getting to that next defect of character, or sin, we talked about anger, and this was really where the epiphany hit for me. And this man says, "John," he says, and it was just like, "I understand you're angry, and what are you afraid of?" And I thought about it, and he says, "John," he says, "your problem is that you're either unwilling or you are ignorant of the fact that your higher power has a plan to fulfill the desires of your heart, these natural, righteous, God given desires, which you've allowed and perverted and twisted in such a way that you acted out in ways that hurt your relationship with God, yourself, and other people. And you're either unwilling or ignorant of the fact that ultimately God will provide for the desires of your heart completely, that He has a plan which is greater and more beautiful than anything you could ever imagine. And the only kicker is He's going to do it in His time, not in John G's time."
And you just have to get out of the way. You just have to get out of the way. This letting go that you've been talking about, letting go and letting God. We did this in another podcast with, it was entitled "The Leader of the Pack," with, and that was Linda is the leader of the pack. She's a wonderful woman, and she said,
of the pack.
"It's all, the leader of the pack is." She said, "It's all about one big let go, one big let go." But we have to go through our changes to do that. And your awareness that you've been talking about, your admission, your acceptance, and the right action. This right action is really the magic. Any real time in treatment that you want to talk about, because you have 37 years of recovery, so you've been using this behavior and these rituals and this faith that works for a very long time. But it really started initially in those first year or two of recovery, wouldn't you say?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the foundation was the true admission of powerlessness to the point that I removed all doubt. When I wrote out that 39-page first step with 10 episodes of powerlessness and then another 10 of unmanageability, and I sat there with the counselor at Smithers Rehab, and she looked at me and she says, "All right, John," and I handed her, the papers. Like I had said earlier, I thought I wrote the great American novel. Hemingway wrote, Old Man and the Sea. I thought that I had just written the young man in the hood, and it was going to be the subject of the next Spike Lee movie, and I thought I was really onto something here. And then this lady wouldn't even read it. She says, "No, John, I don't need to read that." She says, "Did you read it?" And then she asked me, she says, "Are you an addict? Are you an alcoholic?" And I hesitated. And then she says, "Read it." And I sat there for 20 minutes or so, half hour, read it. And then she looked at me and she said, do you feel any differently about that now? She says, "John, are you an addict? Are you an alcoholic?" And I looked at her, I said, "You know something? Reading back the insanity and having my own words reflected back to me, it has truly removed all doubt."
Yeah.
And I believe that was the foundation.
Yep.
And then the rest of the work, that was the beginning of cleaning house.
Let me jump over to anger again, because that gives us the resentment. Resentment is the number one offender. In the Road to Wellness workbook, he talks about relapse prevention. There's 3 R's that will get you back quicker than anything. They 3 letters, the letter R. They all begin with resentment is one, the number one offender. Remorse, pour me a drink, would you? And reservations. I reserve the right not to do what I want to do instead of, and it always gets us into jackpots. But not following directions always seems to get us into jackpots. And we're never going to be perfect with this, but just having the idea of those 3 R's, and when you're cognizant of them, and then that's what it seems like it was put in your hard drive around clearing away the wreckage of resentments, clearing away the wreckage of remorse, that PTSD you had from your addiction, your active addiction, and when you went back and were on active duty and got caught in the backdraft, you had to do some major work on PTSD at that point in time. Would you like to talk about that or no?
Yes. And the work is I had to. It was really just a matter of accepting, the privilege I had of doing the work that I did, and to understand that, looking at the big picture. Yeah, there was sometimes I was, scared to death, literally, and I mean, and the PTSD, it's cumulative in nature. And probably my first major experience with it was when I was hit by a car when I was 7 years old.
Mother of pearl.
And I was hit by a 1966 Grand Safari wagon, driven by this man who was a real estate agent. It was a brand new car. I was running across the street. I got hit so hard. It was a 4-way. It was a red light with a 4-way red light. And I got hit so hard that I came out of my shoes, and one of my shoes went about 75 feet, and it hit a rotating American gas station sign, and my other shoe landed in the street right before that, diagonally across from where I was. I got hit about 40 feet and just missed one of those old-timey iron mailboxes with the conglomerate, stand on it. And when that happened, I was laying there in the street. I had a broken collarbone. Amazingly, I wasn't that injured, but because I didn't see it hit me, and I was only 7. And then this man came up to me, and I could still see his face, and I could see that he was afraid. And he looked down at me, and he looked me in the eyes as all these other kids in the neighborhood were standing around, and I couldn't move, let alone even say anything at that point. And he looked at me, and he says, "Good for you, you little bastard." And that was a very shaming thing that he had said to me. And I just thought about that, and then there was another incident where I was hit by a car another time while I was on a bicycle when I was 13 years old. So these traumatic events, and then having been trapped actually 4 times while I was a fireman.
Oh my gosh.
And the last time, one time I was trapped, and I fell about 15 feet and landed on the hose, and I had broken a transverse process in my back. Didn't know it at the time, and the water started hit the hose, and the hose sprung a leak, and now my mask had gotten filled up with water, and I was starting to drown. And one of my buddies, Joe H. I'll describe him as. We used to call him Heartless, and he comes in, and he was also an ocean lifeguard like I was, and he looked at me and crossed his arms and says, "Get a load of this. Johnny G, the fastest swimmer in the battalion, is going to drown in a hallway on Nostrand Avenue." And then he came down to help me, and I was able to get up. But it's like, yes, I've had the intrusive recollections of some of these traumatic experiences at time. But what I found is that through prayer and meditation, through taking an inventory and keeping the focus on positive things, positive self-talk, also visualization of a positive outcome. So there's been some techniques and other things that I've used, which, my approach to recovery is I'm an old school AA guy, but I'm eclectic in a lot of the modern things that I've been able to take. And I do have a background in meditation, and particularly in the area of Zen. So and I learned TM when I was probably 14 or 15, and I used to go to a Zen monastery when I was 16 years old once a week, and I'd spend up to 3 hours doing meditation there. So the reality is, I found that if I get quiet enough long enough, I may not get the answer, but I can be okay with not knowing. And it's like my great teacher um, once told me, and he's a Zen priest, this man. He says, John, our three tenets are not knowing, bearing witness, and loving action. So I have to allow myself to be in a state of not knowing, or I'm not going to be able to learn anything.
Excellent.
And it's like we talked about it at the meeting this morning. We were talking about spiritual experiences, and it's like in the page 567, the second appendix, it says spiritual experience, and there's a quote at the end of it which says there is a principle which is a bar against all information, proof against all arguments, and cannot help but keep a man in everlasting ignorance. And that principle is contempt prior to investigation.
Wow. Herbert Spencer.
Herbert Spencer. Absolutely amazing. So I had to allow myself to be open, and I have to leave my prejudices at the door to be able to have the true experience. And instead of judging anyone or anything, allow myself to take it all in, to bear witness to it, and then take the appropriate action. Or as I teach this program called faith-based conflict management in the federal prison, one of the techniques that I share with the residents, and we don't call them prisoners, we don't call them inmates, we call them residents, because they deserve respect just like I do, and we're all the same. And I'll share with them this concept of this exercise: stop. STOP. S, stop. T, take a breath. Take 4 breaths. Take a vagal nerve breath. Take
Right.
that box breathing.
Right.
But stop, take a breath, and then observe, which is the allowing ourselves to not know and bear witness. And then P, pick a behavior, and that's where we take the loving action.
There it is. Your stop is very close to the 4 A's. Be aware, admit, accept, and right action. And but stop is we only have a small window in our thought process when a situation occurs. Where are we going to go with that? And a lot of people with PTSD that's untreated will not do stop, will not do the 4 A's. They have to train themselves to do that. You do that in treatment when you trust somebody enough to allow them to teach you the skills that you need to stay well with that. I've never been there with this attitude as much. I'm getting there a little bit. But what you said about Sandy Beach, he used to get excited, and a lot of old timers used to get excited. Oh boy, I don't know something. I'm going to learn something. They would get excited about it.
Not me, man. I know everything.
Keep on talking about the trauma and letting go.
Yes, so as a kid growing up in Catholic school, I got hit a bunch of times. Of course, already talked about the car wrecks, being trapped 4 times as a fireman, and all this. And what I come to learn is that through prayer and meditation, letting go, having the willingness to let go of this and to live in the here and now. And to live in the here and now reminds me, and as I've had a couple of teachers at a distance. One of them was from centuries ago, and but I'll start with the more recent one. Um, a guy named Father Michael Judge. He was the first confirmed death at the World Trade Center. And the last thing that he said was he was walking into the Trade Center and he saw Rudy Giuliani in the street. And Rudy says, "Hey, Father Mike, what should we do?" And he says, "Pray, Rudy, pray." And the answer is the same. I hear Sandy talk about this. I could have guys call me up, with issues, and it's like the solution is the same. The problems can be whatever they are, but the solution is the same. It's about the prayer and meditation. So, looking back at this trauma, I realize that it's going back to the ancient philosopher. Confucius has been credited with this as well as Lao Tzu. And if I'm depressed or resentful, I'm living in the past. And if I'm in a state of fear and anxiety about what may come, and I've had a great many fears about a great many things in my life, the vast majority of them which never came to be. And if I'm living in that state, I'm living in the future. But the only place and the only time that I can be at peace is if I am in this blessed, sacred moment of being in here and now, because that is the only place where life exists.
That is the key. That is the real key.
I got a joke. The most important moment in time is a real gift. That's why they call it the present.
That's right. And if you got one leg in yesterday and one leg in tomorrow, what are you doing on today?
This is a bad visual, man. You're peeing on right now.
But one last thing that Father Michael used to say was this. Last thing Father Mike said was, why worry about tomorrow? God hasn't even created it yet.
Hugs Not Drugs here. If you pray, why worry? If you worry, why pray? I just want to thank you, John, for talking about the first year or so, what needs to be in the hard drive, and the repetitiveness of this is a key. Repetition is the mother of learning, and you certainly have been learning and continue to learn through these 37 years, and you've been a real gift and a godsend to the people that you serve. So thank you so much for serving us on the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, and God bless until next time.
Okay. You heard it. You heard it first from John. I'm also inviting John to be my co-host. I couldn't think of anybody better in the world if I was going to have a co-host. So you'll be hearing more from him, but you've heard his story, and it took 4 parts. Please go back to some of the different parts of part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4. They're all gems. So have a nice day, everybody, and don't forget to love yourself so you can love other people, and remember to hug somebody.
It's happening.